The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour laundromat buzzed overhead as Isabella Rodriguez counted coins for the third time, spreading them across the chipped plastic folding table like she might discover hidden bills among the quarters. $23.47. The result hadn't changed since the first count, but hope died hard when you had a 7-year-old daughter sleeping in the backseat of your car because you couldn't afford to turn on the heat in your apartment. She divided the money with practiced efficiency. $14 for gas, enough to get to work and back for 3 days if she coasted downhill whenever possible. $5 for Sofia's school lunch account, already 2 weeks overdrawn. That left $4.47 for everything else. Food, medicine, the desperate prayers that nothing would break down or fall apart or require money she simply didn't have. The eviction notice had arrived this morning, taped to her door in that particular shade of pink that property managers seem to reserve for bad news. 72 hours to pay the $2,400 in back rent or vacate the premises. She'd been juggling that bill for 3 months, choosing between rent and electricity, rent and food, rent and Sofia's asthma medication. This month, the medication had won. Next week, they'd have nowhere to live. Her phone buzzed against the table. An unknown number. She almost declined. Collectors had her number memorized by now, rotating through different area codes to catch her off guard. But something made her answer. "Miss Rodriguez." The voice was male, older, carrying the formal weight of bad news delivered professionally. "This is Howard Chun, attorney with Chun and Associates in Key Largo. I'm calling regarding the estate of Esperanza Maria Santos, your grandmother. I understand this might come as a surprise, but she passed away 5 days ago. The funeral was yesterday. I apologize for the late notice. Locating you proved difficult." Isabella's hand went numb. The phone slipped, and she caught it against her chest, heart hammering. Abuela Esperanza, dead. The woman who had raised her after her mother disappeared, who had taught her to read the ocean's moods and respect the old stories, who had moved back to the Keys 15 years ago and slowly, inexplicably, cut ties with everyone in the family. I didn't know she was sick." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. The passing was quite sudden. A stroke in her sleep, according to the medical examiner. Peaceful, if that provides any comfort. He paused, papers rustling in the background. "The will reading is scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. my office. Your presence is required. I realize this is short notice, but there are time-sensitive matters regarding the estate that need immediate attention. Tomorrow." Isabella glanced at the wall clock. 11:47 p.m. tomorrow meant taking time off from both her jobs. Ricardo's Marina wouldn't care. She cleaned boats on a cash-only, show-up-when-you-can basis. But the morning shift at Coastal Diner was different. Linda, her manager, had already warned her about missed shifts. One more absence might mean termination. "Is it absolutely necessary that I be there in person? I'm in Miami and..." "I'm afraid so. The will stipulates in-person attendance for all beneficiaries. I can only say that it would be in your best interest to attend, Miss Rodriguez." Something in his tone suggested this wasn't just procedural formality. After she hung up, Isabella sat in the empty laundromat and let herself cry. Not the quiet, controlled tears she'd mastered for when Sofia was awake, but the ugly, gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep and raw. Her grandmother was dead, and Isabella hadn't even known she was sick. 15 years of awkward phone calls and unanswered letters, of wondering why Abuela had retreated to the Keys and stopped returning visits. Now she'd never know why, never get to rebuild what had fractured between them. Sofia stirred in the back seat when Isabella returned to the car, her small face peaceful in sleep despite the cold. 7 years old and already so used to sleeping in uncomfortable places, to eating cereal for dinner, to hearing "we can't afford that" as the answer to everything she wanted. Isabella had failed it so much, but she kept Sofia safe, fed, mostly healthy. It wasn't enough, but it was all she had. The drive to Key Largo took 3.5 hours, starting before dawn to avoid Miami traffic. Isabella called in sick to the diner, hearing Linda's skeptical silence on the other end. Called Ricardo's Marina and told them she'd be back Friday. Hoped the marina gig would still be there when she returned. Sofia woke up as they crossed on a Key Largo, her nose pressed to the window. "Mama, look at the water. Can we go swimming?" "Maybe, baby. We'll see." The automatic response for no, but I don't want to disappoint you right away. "Where are we going?" "To meet a lawyer. About Abuela's house." Sofia's face scrunched in concentration. "Abuela Esperanza? The one with the stories about pirates?" "Yes, that one." Isabella's throat tightened. She passed away, Mija. She's gone to heaven now." "Oh." Sofia processed this with the strange resilience of children who hadn't yet learned the full weight of loss. "Will we get to keep her pirates' stories?" "I hope so, baby. I hope so." Chin's office occupied the second floor of a weathered building near the harbor, the kind of place that had probably looked exactly the same since 1975. The waiting room smelled like old carpet and strong coffee. A receptionist with kind eyes offered them both water and crackers, seeming to sense they'd skipped breakfast. At 10 a.m. exactly, the inner office door opened. Isabella stood, smoothing her only nice dress, a black number from Goodwill that almost fit. Sofia clutched her hand, suddenly shy. They weren't alone. 3 other people filled the office, and Isabella recognized them all with sinking dread. Her uncle Victor, Esperanza's oldest son, sat in the largest chair, his expensive suit and gold watch broadcasting success. His wife Diana perched beside him, her designer handbag probably worth more than Isabella's monthly rent. And worst of all, cousin Marcus stood by the window, arms crossed, that familiar smirk already forming as he looked her up and down. "Well," Marcus drawled, "little Isabella finally decided to grace us with her presence. Nice dress. Goodwill or Salvation Army?" "Marcus." Uncle Victor's voice carried warning, but his eyes held the same judgment. He made it clear years ago what he thought of Isabella's choices. Getting pregnant at 20 by a man who disappeared before Sofia was born, dropping out of college, working common labor, instead of pursuing a real career. Howard Chun cleared his throat, settling behind his desk. He was in his 60s, with gray hair and the patient expression of someone who had mediated many difficult family situations. "Thank you all for coming. I'll get straight to the point, as Mrs. Santos requested brevity in these proceedings." He pulled out a document thick with legal language and began to read. Isabella tried to focus, but the formal words washed over her in waves. Estate division, asset allocation, beneficiary designations. Her mind kept drifting to Abuela's house, the small yellow cottage near the water where Isabella had spent childhood summers, learning to fish and hearing stories about the old days. "To my son Victor Santos," Chun read, "I leave the main residential property at 1247 Ocean View Drive, along with all furnishings, the dock, the boat, and the surrounding half-acre lot. Current appraised value, $1.8 million. Victor nodded as if this was only proper and expected. Diana smiled, already mentally redecorating, "No doubt." "To my grandson Marcus Santos, I leave the commercial property at 89 Harbor Street, currently leased to Harbor Gifts and Marina Supply, along with all rights and income from said property. Current appraised value, $950,000. Marcus's smirk widened. About time the old woman recognized who actually visited her regularly. Chin's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "And finally, to my granddaughter Isabella Maria Rodriguez, I leave the property known as Fort Santiago, located on Santiago Key, including the structure, the surrounding 3 acres of land, and all contents therein. The property was acquired for $600 at county auction in 2008. The silence in the room was immediate and absolute. Then Marcus laughed, sharp and cruel. "The fort? She left Isabella that piece of shit sunken ruin? Oh, that's rich. That's absolutely perfect. I don't understand." Isabella's voice sounded far away. "What fort?" "It's a wreck," Victor said flatly. "Condemned pirate fort from the 1700s on a garbage island that floods at high tide. The county couldn't even give it away. Your grandmother bought it as some kind of historical preservation nonsense, spent years poking around out there like a crazy person. It's not even accessible except by boat, and the structure is half collapsed. Probably costs more to demo than it's worth. The appraisal valued it at approximately $600, Chun said carefully. The same price Mrs. Santos paid for it. Diana's laugh was high and sharp. Well, isn't that appropriate? The granddaughter who couldn't be bothered to visit gets the worthless pile of rocks, while those of us who actually cared for Esperanza get real property. I try to visit. The words came out before Isabella could stop them. She stopped answering my letters. Stopped returning calls. I didn't. Save it. Marcus waved dismissively. We all know you were too busy with your little project to care about family. Now you get exactly what you deserve. Nothing. Chun pulled out 3 envelopes, each with a name written in shaky handwriting. Isabella recognized her grandmother's script immediately, the letters uneven but determined. Mrs. Santos left personal letters for each of you to be opened at your discretion. Victor took his without comment, sliding it into his jacket pocket. Marcus glanced at his envelope and tossed it on the desk. I'll read it later. I assume we're done here. There are documents to sign, acknowledging receipt of the inheritance and understanding the terms. Chun began distributing papers. Isabella took her letter with trembling hands, staring at her name on the envelope. The paper felt too thin, like it might tear if she gripped it wrong. Inside the envelope, she could feel more than just a letter. Something small and metal shifted against her fingers. The signing process took 20 minutes. Victor and Diana left immediately afterward, not looking at Isabella. Marcus paused at the door, that cruel smirk still in place. Enjoy your pile of rocks, cousin. Try not to drown when you visit it. When they were alone, Chin's professional mask softened slightly. I'm sorry about that. Family dynamics during estate distribution can be difficult. It's fine. I'm used to it. Isabella wasn't sure that was true, but saying it made her feel stronger. Can you tell me more about this fort? I don't remember my grandmother ever mentioning it. Chin pulled out a folder thick with documents. Fort Santiago was built in 1749 as a Spanish outpost. Small fortification, maybe 20 men stationed there at most. It was abandoned in the late 1700s, used briefly by pirates. There are some colorful legends about the place, and then forgotten for 2 centuries. The island it sits on is technically protected wetland, which is why it couldn't be developed. The structure itself is partially submerged at high tide, and most people assumed it was too damaged to salvage. He spread out photographs on his desk. The fort looked like something from a movie, weathered stone walls rising from blue-green water, covered in vines and moss. One tower still stood mostly intact, while others had crumbled into picturesque ruins. It was beautiful in a haunted, forgotten way. Your grandmother spent considerable time there over the past 15 years. She had me handle some permits for historical research, though I'm not certain what she was researching. Chun hesitated. Miss Rodriguez, I've handled many estate distributions in my career. Your grandmother was very specific about how she divided her assets. She wanted you to have the fort. But why? It's worthless. They made that very clear. Monetarily, yes. But your grandmother wasn't a woman who measured value in dollars alone. He tapped the envelope still clutched in Isabella's hands. I suggest you read her letter carefully. And if you do decide to visit the fort, please be careful. The structure is unstable in places, and the tides can be dangerous. The drive back toward Miami was quiet. Sofia had fallen asleep again, exhausted by the morning's stress even if she didn't fully understand it. Isabella pulled off at a rest stop, finally opening the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single page, covered in Abuela's handwriting, and a small brass key on a faded ribbon. My dearest Isabella, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I imagine your uncle and cousin have made sure you understand exactly how worthless your inheritance appears. Let them think that. Let everyone think that. The fort is more than it seems, Mija, but only to someone willing to look beyond the obvious, to someone who remembers the old stories. Do you remember the tales I used to tell you about Santiago the pirate? The ones your mother said were too dark for a child? You always listened anyway, didn't you? Always wanted to know what happened next, where the treasure went, why no one ever found it. I found it, Isabella. All of it. Every golden coin, every piece of 8, every doubloon that Santiago hid before the Spanish caught him. It's there in the fort, exactly where it's been for 3 centuries. Waiting for the right person. Waiting for you. The key opens the supply room off the main courtyard. Behind a false wall, you'll find the stairs. Follow them down to the dungeon level. Yes, it still exists below the waterline. The vault room is marked with Santiago's symbol, 3 waves crossed by a sword. You'll know it when you see it. I never spent a single coin, Isabella. Not one. I wanted to give you and your mother everything. But I knew the moment I did, the vultures would circle. Victor with his lawyers, Marcus with his greed. They would have found ways to take it, to claim I wasn't in my right mind, to contest and delay and steal what should be yours. So I waited. I documented everything, worked with Mr. Chun to protect you legally, and most importantly, I taught you to be strong without money, to survive without comfort, to value what matters instead of what glitters. You've lived through struggles they can't imagine, Mija. That struggle made you worthy of this gift. The total value, and yes, I had it appraised discreetly by specialists who understood the historical significance, is approximately $591 million. $591 million in Spanish gold doubloons, pieces of 8, and various other coins from Santiago's raids along the Spanish Main. I know this seems impossible. I know you won't believe it until you see it. That's good. Skepticism will protect you from making mistakes. But when you do see it, when you hold those coins in your hands and understand that they're real, remember this. The treasure isn't the gift, Mija. The gift is having the character to use it wisely. Don't let them take it from you. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for having it. You earned this through every struggle, every sacrifice, every night you went without so Sofia could have. This is your chance, Isabella. Your moment to breathe, to build, to become everything you were meant to be. Trust Mr. Chun. Trust the old stories. And trust yourself, even when everyone else doubts you. With all my love, Abuela Esperanza. P.S. The brass key opens the supply room. The vault itself has a combination lock. The numbers are Sofia's birthday, March 14th, 2017. I want to make sure only you could open it. Isabella read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking harder with each pass. $591 million. The number was so absurd it felt like a joke, like her grandmother had lost her mind in those final years and written fantasy as fact. But the key was real, solid brass, worn smooth from age. The letter was real, Abuela's handwriting unmistakable. And the specific details, the supply room, the dungeon level, Santiago's symbol, carried the weight of truth. She thought about calling Mr. Chun, asking if he knew about this. But Abuela's warning was clear. Let everyone think it's worthless. The moment anyone suspected what the fort really contained, everything would change. Victor would sue. Marcus would steal. People she'd never met would crawl out of nowhere, claiming connection, claiming rights, claiming anything that might give them a piece of the fortune. No, she needed to see it first. Needed to know if this was real or the deluded fantasy of a lonely old woman. And she could figure out what to do next. The eviction notice was still sitting on her passenger seat. 72 hours to vacate. She had $9.47 left after buying gas and crackers for Sofia. Her phone had 6 missed calls from Linda at the diner, probably firing her for missing the shift. The check engine light glowed steady on her dashboard, promising expensive repairs she couldn't afford. But in her pocket, she had a brass key and the impossible promise of $591 million in pirate gold. Isabella started the car and began planning her return to the Keys. The next morning, Isabella stood at Miller's Marina in Isla Mirada, staring at the rental boats with growing despair. The cheapest option was $125 for 4 hours, a small aluminum fishing boat with an outboard motor that looked older than she was. Cash only, the teenager behind the counter said, not looking up from his phone, plus a $200 deposit. $325 she didn't have. Her bank account had $47, the remnants of last week's marina pay. The coins from the laundromat were long spent on gas and food. She'd maxed out her credit card months ago, and even calling Victor or Marcus, assuming they'd take her call, was out of the question. "I'll work it off," Isabella heard herself say. "I clean boats professionally in Miami. I can detail your whole fleet in exchange for a 4-hour rental." The teenager finally looked up, skeptical. "My uncle owns this place. I can't just give away rentals." "Then get your uncle." The uncle, a weathered man named Carlos who smelled like cigarettes and bait, listened to her pitch with crossed arms. He walked her down the dock, pointing at a cabin cruiser covered in bird droppings and salt residue. "You get that looking new, you got a deal. For hours, the aluminum boat, plus gas." Isabella looked at the cruiser. It would take 6 hours minimum, maybe 8. She had cleaning supplies in her car, the professional-grade stuff she used at Ricardo's Marina. "Deal. But I need the boat first. I'll clean when I get back." Carlos laughed. "Nice try, honey. Clean first, then you get the boat. My daughter's 7 years old. I'm not going to run off with your aluminum dinghy and strand her here." Isabella held his gaze, letting him see her desperation and determination in equal measure. 4 hours. I'll be back, and that cruiser will be spotless." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because Carlos pulled out a key ring. 4 hours. You're 1 minute late. I call the cops and report it stolen. Clear. Crystal. Sofia was delighted by the boat ride, trailing her hand in the water as Isabella navigated toward Santiago Key using a printout from Google Maps. The directions from Abuela's letter were more specific. Southeast from Isla Mirada, past the mangrove channels. Watch for the stone marker with the date 1749. The locals avoid it. Say it's haunted. The locals are superstitious and smart enough to believe some things should stay buried. The fort appeared gradually, rising from the water like something from a dream. The stone walls were exactly as the photographs showed, weathered, vine-covered, beautiful in their decay. One tower stood mostly intact, maybe 30 feet tall, with narrow windows that looked like eyes watching their approach. The other structures had collapsed into romantic ruins, stones scattered across what was once probably a courtyard. Isabella tied the boat to a rusted mooring ring embedded in the rock, one of several scattered around the small island. The tide was low, exposing a crumbling stone dock and what looked like the main entrance, a wooden door so rotted it hung crooked in its frame. "It looks like a castle." Sofia's voice echoed across the water. "Can we explore?" "Carefully, Mija. Very carefully. The stones are old and might not be safe." Isabella lifted Sofia onto the dock, testing each stone before putting her full weight on it. The main door opened with minimal effort, wood crumbling at her touch. Inside, the fort was dim and damp, sunlight filtering through gaps in the walls and ceiling. What had once been the main courtyard was now open to the sky, the roof long since collapsed. Vines snaked across the stone floor, and puddles of seawater reflected the blue overhead. It was beautiful and eerie and utterly abandoned. Isabella could see why locals avoided it. The atmosphere carried weight, history, the sense of old violence and older secrets. "Where's the supply room?" Sofia stayed close to her mother, suddenly less confident about exploration. Isabella circled the courtyard slowly, examining each doorway and alcove. Most led to collapsed spaces, rooms filled with debris and standing water. But on the eastern wall, she found a door that was different. Newer wood, treated with some kind of sealant, with a brass lock that gleamed faintly despite years of salt air. The key from Abuela's letter slid in smoothly. The lock turned with a soft click. Behind the door was a small room, maybe 10 feet square, surprisingly dry. Supplies lined wooden shelves, flashlights, batteries, rope, a first aid kit, all relatively new. Abuela had been preparing for someone to follow in her footsteps. On the far wall, what appeared to be a wooden supply cabinet sat flush against the stone. Isabella approached slowly, heart hammering. The cabinet looked solid, built into the wall itself. But when she pushed on the right side, it shifted slightly. Not a cabinet, a door. A false wall, exactly as Abuela had described. Behind it, stone steps descended into darkness. "Mama, what's down there?" Sofia's voice was small, uncertain. "I'm not sure yet, baby. Stay here where I can see you. Okay? Don't touch anything, don't wander off." Can you do that for me? Sofia nodded, eyes wide. Isabella grabbed one of the flashlights from the supply shelf, testing it. The beam cut through the darkness below, revealing steps that disappeared into water. The stairs went down 15 feet, maybe 20. The lower steps were submerged, covered by maybe 2 feet of dark water that lapped gently against stone. Below the waterline, Isabella could make out another doorway, an arched entrance that would require wading, or at low tide, probably just ankle-deep water. She checked the time. Low tide was in 40 minutes, according to the tide chart Carlos had given her. The water level would drop another foot, maybe 18 inches. Enough to explore without getting completely soaked. We're going to wait a little bit, Isabella called up to Sofia. Let the water get lower. While they waited, Isabella explored the rest of the supply room more carefully. In a waterproof container, she found more notes from Abuela. These ones practical. Best time to access, 2 hours before low tide. Water depth at lowest, 6 to 8 inches. Watch for sharp stones on the floor. The vault room is dry. I installed a pump system to keep it clear. Battery powered, should last for years. If you hear water rushing, get out immediately. The outer walls are compromised in 2 places and could flood if a storm surge hits. There are also maps, hand-drawn but detailed, showing the dungeon layout. 3 main rooms, one that had flooded completely, one that was partially accessible, and the vault room at the far end. Santiago's symbol, 3 waves crossed by a sword, was marked clearly on the vault door. 30 minutes later, the water had receded enough. Isabella tested the depth, 6 inches, exactly as Abuela had noted. The floor was slippery but navigable. Sofia, I need you to stay right here, at the top of the stairs where you can see me. If anything scary happens, if water starts rising fast, you run outside and get in the boat. Can you remember that? Don't go, Mama. What if something bad happens? Nothing bad is going to happen, baby. I'm just going to look around, see what Abuela wanted me to find. I'll be right back. Isabella kissed her daughter's forehead, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The water was cold, soaking through her sneakers immediately. Isabella waded slowly, flashlight sweeping across stone walls green with algae. The first room was exactly as the map showed, partially collapsed, filled with debris, nothing of value visible. She pushed through into the second room. This one was more intact. The ceiling was low, maybe 6 feet, forcing her to duck in places. Stone columns supported arched vaults overhead, impressive engineering for something built 3 centuries ago. Against one wall, she could see what looked like old wooden crates, but they'd rotted through, spilling unidentifiable contents into the water. The far doorway was narrow, barely 3 feet wide. Carved into the stone above, it was the symbol, 3 waves crossed by a sword, exactly as Abuela had described. Beyond the doorway, the floor sloped upward. The water became shallower, then disappeared entirely. The vault room was dry, just as the notes promised. Isabella could hear the soft hum of a pump somewhere in the darkness, working to keep the space clear. She swept her flashlight across the room, and her breath stopped. The walls were lined with wooden shelves, and on those shelves sat wooden chests, dozens of them, each one maybe 2 feet long and a foot deep. Simple construction, aged dark with time, with metal bands that had gone green with corrosion. Isabella approached the nearest chest with trembling hands. No lock. The lid lifted with a creak that echoed off the stone walls. Inside, packed carefully in rotted cloth, were coins. Gold coins, gleaming faintly in her flashlight beam. She picked one up, feeling its weight, its reality. On one side, she could make out a coat of arms and Spanish text. On the other, pillars and more text, worn but visible, plus ultra. Spanish doubloons. Real ones. She lifted another coin, then another. The chest was full of them, layer after layer packed in cloth to prevent damage. She couldn't count them, couldn't begin to estimate. Hundreds, maybe thousands. And there were dozens of chests. Isabella set down the flashlight carefully and opened another chest. More coins, these ones smaller. Pieces of 8, the famous Spanish dollar that had funded empires. Another chest held larger coins, some so worn the images were barely visible. Another held coins from different eras, different mints, a pirate's collection of plundered wealth from decades of raids. She opened chest after chest, her hands shaking harder with each revelation. All full, all packed with gold and silver coins that represented not just monetary value, but historical significance. This wasn't just treasure. This was a museum's worth of artifacts, a historian's dream, proof of legends that most people assumed were just stories. Santiago the pirate had been real. His treasure had been real, and her grandmother had found it, documented it, and kept it secret for 15 years, waiting for the right moment, the right person, waiting for Isabella. "Mama." Sofia's voice echoed down the stairs, scared. "Mama, are you okay?" Isabella grabbed a handful of coins and ran back through the rooms, splashing through water that suddenly felt much colder. She burst up the stairs, finding Sofia right where she'd left her, clutching the stuffed elephant she carried everywhere. "I'm fine, baby. I'm sorry I worried you." Isabella knelt down, holding out her hand. "Look what I found." Sofia's eyes went wide. Pirate treasure? Real pirate treasure. Real pirate treasure. Isabella felt tears starting, couldn't stop them. Just like in Abuela's stories. "It's all real, Sofia. All of it." She sat on the stone floor of the supply room, Sofia in her lap, and opened her hand to look at the coins more closely in better light. Each one was unique, bearing different dates, different markings. Some were Spanish, some Portuguese, some from mints she didn't recognize. Together, they represented a fortune that would change everything. $591 million, Abuela's letter had said. Isabella had thought it was exaggeration, old woman hyperbole. But looking at the chests downstairs, counting them mentally, estimating their contents, that number suddenly seemed entirely possible. Maybe even conservative. She thought about the eviction notice. About Linda at the diner, probably hiring her replacement right now. About Marcus's cruel laughter and Victor's dismissive contempt. About every person who had ever made her feel small, worthless, less than because she was poor. None of it mattered anymore. Not the eviction, not the jobs, not the judgments. She was holding Spanish doubloons worth millions in her hand, and there were dozens of chests full of them sitting in a vault beneath a forgotten fort. But even as relief and joy flooded through her, Abuela's warning echoed in her mind. Don't let them take it from you. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for having it. The moment anyone knew about this, everything would change. People would come out of nowhere, family, strangers, the government, treasure hunters, historians, thieves. They would all want a piece. They would all have reasons why they deserved it, why Isabella didn't, why the treasure should be shared or donated or studied or confiscated. She needed help, professional help, legal protection. But whom could she trust? Mr. Chun, maybe Abuela had trusted him with the estate planning. But even he might be obligated to report a fine like this. There are laws about historical artifacts, maritime salvage, treasure troves. Isabella knew nothing about any of it. For now, she needed to stay quiet. Needed time to research, to plan, to figure out the right way to protect what Abuela had left her. She photographed the coins carefully, documenting each chest, creating evidence that would prove the treasure's existence if she needed it. Then she selected 5 coins, slipping them into her pocket. Just 5, enough to get appraised, to verify authenticity, to begin understanding what she actually had. The rest stayed in the vault, protected by water and stone and 3 centuries of successful hiding. They returned to Miller's Marina 15 minutes before her 4 hours expired. Carlos was waiting on the dock, arms crossed. "Thought maybe you decided to keep my boat." "A deal's a deal." Isabella helped Sofia onto the dock, then grabbed her cleaning supplies from the car. "Where do you want me to start on that cruiser?" Carlos watched her work for the first hour, suspicious. But Isabella knew her business. She'd been detailing boats for 2 years, understood what buyers looked for, knew how to make a vessel shine. By the 3rd hour, Carlos had wandered off to handle other business. By the 6th hour, when she finally finished, the cruiser looked showroom new. Carlos inspected her work with grudging approval. "You're good at this. You looking for regular work? I could use someone reliable." "Maybe. I need to take care of some family business first, but I might be back this way soon." Isabella wiped sweat from her forehead, exhausted. Can I ask you something? What do you know about Fort Santiago? The pirate fort? Not much. Built by the Spanish, used by pirates after they abandoned it. There's old stories about buried treasure. Every pirate fort has those stories. Local legend says Santiago hid his fortune there before the Spanish Navy caught him. They executed him without finding the gold, drove people crazy for 100 years trying to locate it. Carlos lit a cigarette. Your grandmother used to ask about it too. Spent a lot of time out there, poking around in the ruins. Did anyone else ever go there? Treasure hunters, historians, anyone like that? Not recently. County owns the island, designated it protected wetland back in the 90s. Can't develop it, can't salvage it, technically can't even visit without a permit. But nobody enforces it. Place is too remote, too dangerous. Current gets tricky around there at certain tides, and the fort itself is a death trap. Stones falling all the time. Your grandmother got grandfathered in with some historical research permit, but that died with her. So the fort remained forgotten, legally protected, but practically ignored. That was good. That gave Isabella time. The drive back to Miami was long and exhausting. Sofia fell asleep immediately, worn out by the adventure. Isabella drove on autopilot, her mind racing through implications, possibilities, problems. The first issue was authentication. She needed to know, absolutely, that the coins were real and as valuable as Isabella claimed. The second issue was legal protection. If the treasure was legally hers, and Abuela's careful estate planning suggested it was, she needed ironclad documentation proving it before anyone else staked a claim. Third was logistics. How did you turn $591 million in antique coins into usable wealth without triggering investigations, thefts, or family lawsuits? And finally, the emotional issue. What did she actually want to do with this fortune? The eviction notice was still sitting on her passenger seat. The 72-hour deadline, now down to 36 hours. Isabella laughed, the sound slightly hysterical even to her own ears. She was about to be homeless while sitting on $500 million in pirate gold. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Isabella, this is Mr. Chun. Have you had a chance to visit the fort yet? If so, I'd like to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience. There are matters we need to discuss regarding the property. Matters your grandmother made me promise to address with you personally. So Chin knew something. Maybe not everything, but something. Abuela had trusted him enough to make him her lawyer, to have him handle the estate distribution knowing that Isabella would end up with the fort. That had to count for something. Isabella texted back, "Can you meet tomorrow? Morning, your office?" The response came immediately, 10 a.m. Come alone if possible. This is a sensitive matter. The next morning, Isabella dropped Sofia off at her friend Lucia's apartment, promising to pick her up by lunch. Lucia's mother Maria didn't ask questions, just hugged Isabella and said it'd take all the time she needed. Good people still existed in the world. Isabella needed to remember that. Chin's office felt different today, less intimidating now that Isabella wasn't walking in as the poor relation getting handed scraps. She wore the same Goodwill dress, carried the same worn purse, but internally, she felt transformed. She had the 5 coins in her pocket and the knowledge of what awaited in the fort's vault. Chin's office felt different today, less intimidating now that Isabella wasn't walking in as the poor relation getting handed scraps. She wore the same Goodwill dress, carried the same worn purse, but internally, she felt transformed. She had the 5 coins in her pocket and the knowledge of what awaited in the fort's vault. Parameter name equals new under her. Chin's office felt different today, less intimidating now that Isabella wasn't walking in as the poor relation getting handed scraps. She wore the same Goodwill dress, carried the same worn purse, but internally, she felt transformed. She had the 5 coins in her pocket and the knowledge of what awaited in the fort's vault. Chin was waiting for her, 2 cups of coffee already poured. He gestured to a chair and closed the office door firmly, something he hadn't done during the will reading. His expression was serious, almost concerned. "Miss Rodriguez, thank you for coming. Before we begin, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to trust that I'm asking for your protection, not out of curiosity." He settled into his chair, hands folded on the desk. "Did you visit Fort Santiago?" Isabella's first instinct was to lie, to protect the secret. But Abuela had trusted this man, had worked with him for years, had specifically told Isabella to trust him. "Yes, yesterday. And did you find what your grandmother left for you?" The question hung in the air between them. Isabella reached into her pocket slowly, pulling out one of the coins. She set it on the desk between them, the gold catching the fluorescent light. Chin picked it up with careful reverence, turning it over in his hands. His expression didn't change. No surprise, no excitement. Just a slight nod, as if confirming something he'd already known. "Spanish doubloon. 8 escudos, if I'm not mistaken. Probably minted in the mid-1700s based on the wear patterns." "You knew." Isabella's voice came out flat. "You knew what was there." "I suspected. Your grandmother hired me 15 years ago to handle the purchase of Fort Santiago through a complicated series of legal entities designed to obscure her identity. She paid me very well to ask no questions and maintain absolute confidentiality. Over the years, she would visit my office occasionally, always bringing historical documents for me to secure my safe. Documents that appeared to be authentication certificates, appraisal estimates, provenance research." He handed the coin back to Isabella. "I never asked her directly, and she never told me explicitly, but yes, I suspected she had found something extraordinary at the fort. When she came to me 2 years ago to update her will, she made very specific requests about how the estate should be divided. She wanted you to have the fort, wanted it legally protected, and wanted you to have time to secure whatever was there before anyone else could interfere. Does anyone else know? My uncle, Marcus, anyone?" "No one." The purchase of the fort was buried in paperwork, filtered through multiple entities that ultimately traced back to your grandmother, but wouldn't be obvious without considerable investigation. Victor and Marcus have no idea what she was doing out there all those years. They assumed she was just an eccentric old woman with too much time and nostalgia for pirate stories. Isabella felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "So it's mine? Legally, completely mine? That's more complicated than you might think, and that's why I needed to meet with you immediately." Chin pulled out a thick folder. Florida law regarding treasure trove is complex. In general, if you find treasure on property you own, it belongs to you. However, there are exceptions. If the treasure was originally owned by a governmental entity, like Spain, they might have legal claim. If it's considered archaeological heritage, the state might claim jurisdiction. If it has significant historical value, various museums and institutions might contest ownership. He opened the folder, showing her legal precedents, case studies, documentation. Your grandmother spent years researching this exact issue. She consulted with maritime lawyers, treasure salvage experts, historians. The fort itself was abandoned by Spain in 1779, predating any modern international treaties about cultural heritage. The land it sits on was sold by Spain to various private owners before eventually ending up in county hands, and you legitimately purchased it from the county. For $600. The price is irrelevant. You bought it legally at public auction with no claims against it. The county had no knowledge of what the fort contained, so there's no basis for them to claim they were defrauded. As for Spain, they officially renounced all claims to treasure in former colonial territories as part of various 19th century treaties. Your grandmother documented all of this meticulously. Chin pulled out another document. However, the moment you try to sell even a single coin, authenticate it publicly, or otherwise reveal what you've found, multiple parties will emerge trying to claim the treasure. Victor and Marcus will contest the will, claiming your grandmother wasn't of sound mind. The state of Florida will investigate whether proper archaeological procedures were followed. The federal government might claim jurisdiction under various laws. And treasure hunters, historians, and plain old thieves will descend on that fort like locusts. Isabella's hope began to crumble. "So what do I do? Just leave it there? Pretend it doesn't exist?" "No. You protect it properly before revealing it. And that's where I come in." Chin pulled out another set of documents. "Your grandmother paid me a substantial retainer to handle exactly this situation. First, we need professional authentication done privately by experts who understand the need for discretion. I have contacts who can do this, people who've worked with major treasure finds and know how to maintain confidentiality until legal protections are in place. How long will that take? 3 to 6 months for proper authentication, legal documentation, and protective measures. During that time, you continue living your life exactly as you have been. Don't change anything. Don't pay off debts. Don't quit your jobs. Don't buy anything expensive. Don't tell anyone, and I mean anyone, what you found. Isabella thought about the eviction notice, about Sofia's worn-out shoes, about the check engine light glowing in her car. I'm about to be evicted. I can't just pretend everything's normal when I'm about to be homeless. Chen's expression softened. How much do you need immediately to stabilize your situation? To pay rent, handle emergencies, keep your head above water while we work through the legal process? I don't know. 5,000? 10,000? Enough to not be constantly terrified. The numbers felt impossibly large, even though they represented a fraction of a single coin's worth. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to loan you $15,000 from your grandmother's estate fund. Money she set aside specifically for this purpose. It's documented as an estate settlement advance, completely legal, nothing that will raise suspicions. You'll pay your back rent, fix your car, buy Sofia some new shoes, and maintain your normal life. In exchange, you don't visit the fort again until I give you the all-clear. You don't tell anyone about the treasure. And you let me handle the legal protection. He pulled out a check, already written. $15,000, made out to Isabella Rodriguez. Your grandmother was very thorough. She knew you'd need immediate help, but also knew that any large sum would raise questions. This amount is explainable, reasonable, exactly what someone might expect from a small estate distribution. Isabella stared at the check, tears blurring her vision. $15,000. It wasn't the fortune sitting in the vault, but it was salvation. It was time. It was breathing room. It was the difference between drowning and surviving long enough to figure out what to do next. Why are you helping me? You could have just handled the whole reading and walked away. Because your grandmother asked me to. Because in 40 years of practicing law, I've rarely met someone with her combination of intelligence, patience, and integrity. She told me once that you were exactly like her, that you had the same strength she needed to survive after your grandfather died and left her with nothing. She wanted to give you what she never had, a chance to build something meaningful without starting from zero. Chun slid the check across the desk. Take it, pay your bills, stabilize your life, and then we'll figure out how to secure your inheritance properly. But Isabella, you need to understand something. The next few months are going to be the hardest of your life. You're going to have to watch people you care about struggle while knowing you could help them. You're going to have to bite your tongue when your family mocks you. You're going to have to maintain normalcy while sitting on knowledge that could change everything. Can you do that? Isabella thought about Abuela, living modestly for 15 years while knowing what sat beneath the fort. Never spending a coin, never revealing the secret, maintaining patience that most people couldn't imagine. If Abuela could do it for 15 years, Isabella could manage for 6 months. Yes, I can do it. Good. Now, let me tell you about the authentication process and what to expect. The conversation lasted another hour. Chun explained the network of experts he'd be contacting. Numismatists who specialized in Spanish colonial coins, maritime historians who could verify provenance, conservationists who could assess the collection's condition without removing it from the fort. Each person had been carefully vetted by Abuela, had signed non-disclosure agreements, and understood the sensitivity of the situation. He also explained the legal strategy, documenting everything before going public, establishing clear ownership through historical research and property law, preparing for the inevitable challenges from family and government entities. It would be a long process, potentially years before every legal question was resolved, but Chun was confident they could protect Isabella's claim. One more thing, Chun said as Isabella prepared to leave. Your Uncle Victor called me yesterday. He's asking questions about the fort, about why your grandmother bought it, what she was doing out there. I told him it was historical research, nothing more. But he's suspicious. Marcus, too. They can't believe your grandmother would give you something valuable and then the real estate. Be prepared for them to start investigating. What if they find out? They won't, as long as you're careful. The fort is legally yours. They can't access it without your permission. But if they discover there's treasure involved, they will fight you with every resource they have. Victor has money. Marcus has connections. Between them, they could tie you up in court for years, drain your resources, make your life hell. Isabella felt the weight of the coins in her pocket, solid and real. I won't let them take this from me. Abuela wanted me to have it. Then be smart, be patient, and trust the process. Chen walked her to the door. I'll be in touch in a few days with updates on the authentication team. In the meantime, live your life. Take care of Sofia, and don't let anyone see you've changed. Isabella walked out of the office with the check in her purse and a plan in her mind. First, the bank, then the landlord, then the car repair shop. Small, explainable expenses that would stabilize her life without raising questions. But as she reached her car, she found Marcus leaning against it, arms crossed, that familiar smirk in place. Well, little Isabella visiting the lawyer again. Got yourself a good deal on that pile of rocks. His tone was mocking, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. I've been thinking about that fort, about why Abuela would give you something so specific. Old woman didn't do anything without a reason. It's just an old ruin, Marcus. You said so yourself. Maybe, or maybe there's something you're not telling us. You always were Abuela's favorite, even though you never visited, never called. Makes me wonder what promises she made you. What secrets she whispered. Isabella kept her expression neutral, even as her heart hammered. The lawyer gave me a small settlement check from Abuela's estate. That's all. Nothing dramatic. How much? That's not your business. Marcus pushed off from the car, moving closer. Everything about that estate is my business. Victor and I have been talking to our own lawyers. Abuela wasn't in her right mind at the end. Paranoid, obsessed with that stupid fort. We're going to contest the will, Isabella. Make sure the estate gets divided fairly. Mr. Chen said the will was legally sound. Chen is your lawyer now. Of course he'd say that. But we've got better lawyers, ones who specialize in estate disputes. They think we have a very strong case. He smiled, cold and threatening. So whatever you're planning, whatever you think you're going to get out of this, think again. That fort will be tied up in legal proceedings for years. And when we win, and we will win, you'll get exactly what you deserve. Nothing. He walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Isabella shaking with anger and fear. The fight was starting earlier than Chun had predicted. Victor and Marcus weren't going to wait, weren't going to let her secure the treasure before challenging her claim. She got in her car and drove, nowhere specific, just needing to move to think. The check in her purse represented immediate salvation, but Marcus's threat represented long-term danger. If they contested the will successfully, everything Abuela had planned would be undone. Her phone rang. Chun. Marcus just confronted me, Isabella said without preamble. He threatened to contest the will. I know. Victor called me 5 minutes ago with the same threat. They're moving faster than I expected. Chen's voice was grim. This complicates things, but it doesn't change the fundamental situation. The will is solid. Your grandmother was examined by 3 different doctors in the months before her death, all of whom certified her mental competence. But estate litigation can drag on for years, freeze assets, complicate everything. What do I do? Exactly what we discussed. Live your life. Let me handle the legal challenges. And whatever you do, don't let them provoke you into revealing what you've found. That's what they're trying to do. Make you defensive. Make you prove the fort has value. Make you slip up. After she hung up, Isabella sat in her parked car and cried. Not the panicked tears of yesterday, but tears of exhaustion, of feeling the weight of what Abuela had given her. This fortune wasn't freedom, not yet. It was responsibility, secrecy, patience. It was knowing she could save herself and Sofia, but having to wait, having to endure, having to be strong while everyone around her assumed she was weak. But Abuela had done it for 15 years. Isabella could manage for 6 months. She wiped her eyes, started the car, and drove to the bank to deposit the check. The first step in a very long journey toward claiming what was rightfully hers. The landlord counted the cash twice, spreading the bills across his desk like he expected them to disappear. $2,400 in rent, plus late fees. The eviction notice he taped to Isabella's door 3 days ago now sat crumpled in his trash can. "Didn't think you'd come up with it," he said, not bothering to hide his surprise. "Thought for sure I'd be changing locks next week. Family emergency." Isabella kept her voice neutral. "My grandmother passed away. Left me a small inheritance." "Small, huh?" He counted the bills a third time. "Well, you're paid through the end of the month. Try to stay current going forward, yeah? I got other tenants waiting for this unit." Isabella took her receipt and left before he could ask more questions. The relief of not being homeless should have felt overwhelming, but instead, it sat quiet and solid in her chest. One crisis averted, 1,000 more waiting. The auto repair shop was next. The check engine light that had been glowing for 3 months turned out to be a faulty oxygen sensor and a crack in the exhaust manifold. $800, paid in cash. The mechanic raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, just handed her the keys and told her to drive safe. At Target, Isabella bought Sofia new shoes. Actual new shoes, not the scuffed hand-me-downs from the thrift store. She bought groceries without calculating every penny, filling the cart with fresh fruit and vegetables instead of just rice and beans. She paid the overdue balance on Sofia's school lunch account, bought her a new winter coat, replaced the stuffed elephant's torn ear with careful stitching and a tiny patch. Small things, explainable things, nothing that would make anyone look twice. But inside, Isabella felt the surreal disconnect between her external reality and internal knowledge. She was buying discount groceries while sitting on $591 million in Spanish gold. She was clipping coupons while owning a treasure that museums would kill to possess. The dissonance made her feel slightly unhinged, like she was living in 2 worlds simultaneously. That night, Sofia climbed into bed with her new elephant, its ear finally whole again. "Mama, why did Abuela give you the castle and Uncle Victor the house?" Isabella had been expecting this question, had rehearsed her answer. "Because Uncle Victor wanted the house. He always did, and Abuela knew I would appreciate the fort, the history of it. Is it worth a lot of money?" "No, baby. It's just old stones. But it's special because it belonged to Abuela, and she wanted me to have something that reminded me of her stories." Sofia accepted this easily, the way children accepted things that adults wrestled with. "Can we go back and visit it again?" "Maybe someday, but not for a while. It's dangerous, and I want to make sure it's safe first." After Sofia fell asleep, Isabella pulled out the remaining 4 coins and studied them in the lamplight. Each one told a story, dates from different years, mint marks from different locations, were patterns suggesting decades or centuries of circulation before Santiago had plundered them. These weren't just gold. They were history, artifacts, physical evidence of an empire that had once ruled half the world. And they were hers. Completely, legally, impossibly hers. Her phone buzzed with a text from Chun. "Authentication team ready. Need to schedule initial site visit. Can you be available next Thursday? Early morning? They'll need 4 to 5 hours for preliminary assessment." Isabella texted back. "I work Thursday mornings. Can we do afternoon? Morning is better for tides and privacy. Anyway, you can call in sick." She thought about Linda at the diner, already annoyed about Isabella's recent absences. Another missed shift might mean termination. But Linda's opinion wouldn't matter in 6 months, in a year. The diner job was temporary. The treasure was permanent. "I'll make it work." The next few days passed in a strange fog of normalcy tinged with secret knowledge. Isabella went to work at the marina, scrubbing boat decks and polishing chrome while Marcus's words echoed in her mind. "Whatever you think you're going to get out of this, think again." She smiled at customers, accepted cash payments, and said nothing about the fortune waiting beneath the water. At night, she researched Spanish colonial coins, treasure law, estate disputes. She learned that Spanish doubloons from the 1700s could fetch anywhere from $3,000 to $50,000 each, depending on condition, rarity, and provenance. She learned that major treasure finds often resulted in decades of litigation. She learned that the line between legally protected historical artifacts and personal property was blurrier than most people realized. She also learned that her family was digging. On Wednesday evening, Maria called from across the hall, voice concerned. "Isabella, there was a man here earlier asking about you. Tall, expensive suit, said he was a private investigator working for your uncle. Wanted to know about your finances, your work schedule, whether you'd come into any money recently." Isabella's blood went cold. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I said you were a good neighbor and a good mother, and that was all I knew." "But Isabella, what's going on? Are you in some kind of trouble?" "No trouble. Just family drama. My uncle is upset about my grandmother's will. Thinks I got something valuable when I didn't. He's trying to find evidence to contest the inheritance." "Do you need a lawyer?" "I have one. But thank you, Maria. And if anyone else comes asking questions, please don't tell them anything." After she hung up, Isabella sat in her darkened living room and felt the walls closing in. Victor and Marcus weren't just threatening. They were actively investigating. How long before they found someone who would talk? How long before they put together enough pieces to realize the fort might be more than worthless ruins? Thursday morning arrived too quickly. Isabella called the diner at 6 a.m., putting on her most miserable voice. "Linda, I'm so sorry. I've been throwing up all night. Food poisoning, I think. I can barely stand up." Linda's sigh carried through the phone. "This is the fourth time in 3 weeks, Isabella." "I know. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. You said that last time. Look, you're a good worker when you're here, but I need reliability. Miss another shift this month, and I'll have to let you go." "I understand. I'll be there tomorrow, I promise." Isabella dressed quickly, checking on Sofia before heading out. Maria had agreed to watch her for the day, asking no questions beyond whether everything was okay. Good people still existed. Isabella needed to remember that. The drive to Islamorada took 2 hours, dawn breaking across the water as she navigated the overseas highway. Chin was waiting at Miller's Marina with 3 other people, a man and woman in their 60s wearing practical field clothes, and a younger man with expensive camera equipment. "Isabella, this is Dr. Patricia Simmons and Dr. Robert Marsh, numismatist specializing in Spanish colonial currency. And this is Kevin Torres, their documentation specialist. Everyone here has signed NDAs and understands the sensitive nature of this assessment." Dr. Simmons shook Isabella's hand with a grip that was firm and assessing. "Mr. Chun has told us very little, which I appreciate. The less we know going in, the more objective our assessment can be. I understand we're looking at a potential collection of colonial-era coins. Something like that. They took 2 boats out to Santiago Key. Chun had rented a second one to accommodate the team and their equipment. The fort looked different in morning light, less romantic and more dangerous. Several stones had fallen since Isabella's last visit, leaving gaps in the walls that revealed how precarious the structure really was. "Jesus," Kevin muttered, staring up at the tower. "That thing looks like it could collapse any second." "It's been standing for 300 years, Chin said mildly. "I think it'll last another few hours." Isabella led them through the supply room and down to the vault, the process already familiar. The tide was perfect, water levels low enough for easy access. Dr. Marsh moved carefully, examining the stonework and architecture with professional interest. "This is remarkable preservation for a structure this old. Someone's been maintaining it, the pump system, the dehumidifiers. This isn't accidental." "My grandmother," Isabella said. "She bought the fort 15 years ago. Spent a lot of time out here." When they reached the vault room, Isabella swept her flashlight across the rows of chests. Dr. Simmons made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. "Oh my God. Robert, look at this." The next 4 hours passed in a blur of professional documentation. Dr. Simmons and Dr. Marsh opened each chest methodically, photographing contents, taking samples, examining individual coins with jeweler's loupes and portable microscopes. Kevin set up lights and captured everything on high-resolution video, his camera whirring constantly. "These are real," Dr. Simmons said after the first hour, voice tight with controlled excitement. "Genuine Spanish doubloons, pieces of 8, various colonial mint marks. The condition varies. Some are heavily circulated, Others look like they were barely used before being stashed here. This is extraordinary. How many? Isabella, try to keep her voice steady. We won't know until we do a complete inventory, but preliminary estimate based on chest sizes and density? Dr. Marsh looked up from his microscope. Somewhere between 40 and 60,000 individual coins. Mix of gold doubloons, pieces of 8, smaller denominations. If the quality holds across the collection, you're looking at. He trailed off, doing calculations on his phone. Conservative estimate, accounting for condition variations and assuming average historical value rather than premium pieces, probably $450 to $500 million. If we find rare dates or exceptional preservation, that number could climb significantly higher. Dr. Simmons nodded agreement. Your grandmother's letter said $591 million. I'd say that's well within the reasonable range, possibly even conservative if she hadn't accounted for appreciation over the past 15 years. The market for Spanish colonial coins has been strong. Isabella sat down on the stone floor, legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. Hearing the number from experts made it real in a way it hadn't been before. This wasn't fantasy or exaggeration. This was actually happening. Where did these come from? Kevin asked, still filming. I mean, obviously they're pirate treasure, but whose? And how did your grandmother know they were here? Santiago the pirate, Isabella said. According to family stories, he was a real person. Spanish naval officer who turned pirate in the 1760s, raided shipping lanes throughout the Caribbean. The Spanish Navy caught him in 1779, executed him without ever finding his treasure. Legend said he hid it somewhere in the Keys, but no one knew where. Until your grandmother figured it out. Dr. Marsh examined another coin, his expression reverent. How'd she find this place? I don't know. She never told anyone. Just spent 15 years documenting everything, making sure it would be legally protected when she revealed it. Dr. Simmons carefully repacked a chest. Your grandmother was a brilliant woman. Most treasure hunters would have gone public immediately, trying to cash in. The publicity alone would have made authentication and legal protection nearly impossible. By waiting, by documenting everything quietly, she gave you the best chance of keeping this collection intact. Speaking of legal protection, Chin interrupted, what do we need to do to secure Isabella's ownership? Provenance documentation, Dr. Simmons said immediately. We need to establish how these coins got here, when, and under what circumstances. Maritime law is complex, but if we can prove this collection was cached here before modern salvage regulations went into effect, and that Isabella legally owns the property where it was found, her claim should be strong. What about Spain? Isabella asked. Don't they have claims to treasure from their colonial period? Not in this case, Dr. Marsh said. Spain renounced most colonial treasure claims in various 19th century treaties. If this was cargo from a documented Spanish Navy vessel, they might have an argument. But pirate treasure, plundered from multiple sources and cached by non-governmental actors? That's personal property, and it belongs to whoever owns the land where it was found. Which is you, Chun said, looking at Isabella. As long as we can prove the coins were here before you purchased the property, which your grandmother's documentation should establish. They spent another hour photographing and cataloging, creating the preliminary assessment that would form the foundation of Isabella's legal claim. When they finally emerged from the vault, squinting in bright midday sun, Dr. Simmons pulled Isabella aside. I need you to understand something. The moment this discovery goes public, and it will have to eventually, your life will change permanently. Every treasure hunter in America will know your name. Historians will want access. Museums will make offers. The government will investigate. Your family will absolutely contest your claim, probably with considerable legal resources. I know. Do you? Because I've worked with several major treasure finds over my career, and I've watched what happens to the people who discover them. The lawsuits, the death threats, the constant pressure from people who think they deserve a piece. One woman I worked with had her house broken into 6 times in 2 years. Another had family members she'd never met crawl out of nowhere claiming inheritance rights. Dr. Simmons' expression was kind but firm. You seem like a good person, Isabella. You've clearly struggled financially. I can see in your clothes, your car, the way you move through the world. This treasure will solve your money problems, but it will create other problems you can't imagine yet. Make sure you're ready for that before we proceed. Isabella thought about Sofia, about the life they'd been living, about eviction notices and empty refrigerators and choosing between medicine and rent, about 7 years of constant, grinding poverty that wore you down until you forgot what stability felt like. I'm ready. The team packed up their equipment, promising to have a preliminary report ready within a week. As they motored away from the fort, Isabella took one last look at the crumbling walls. Somewhere beneath those stones sat a fortune that would change everything. The question was whether she could protect it long enough to claim it. Back in Miami, Isabella picked up Sofia from Maria's apartment and tried to act normal. They made dinner together, real chicken, real vegetables, not just rice and beans. Sofia chattered about her day, about school, about the fort and Abuela's stories. Isabella listened and smiled and tried not to think about Dr. Simmons' warnings. That night, after Sofia was asleep, Isabella's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Isabella Rodriguez? The voice was male, young, vaguely threatening. This is Jake Martinez. I'm a reporter with the Miami Herald. I'm working on a story about unusual estate distributions in Florida, particularly cases where elderly individuals leave property to unexpected beneficiaries. I understand your grandmother recently left you an unusual inheritance. A fort on Santiago Key? Isabella's hand tightened on the phone. No comment. I'm just trying to understand the situation. Your Uncle Victor and Cousin Marcus have expressed concerns about their mother's mental state at the time the will was written. They've suggested there might be something valuable at the fort that you're not disclosing. Would you like to respond to those allegations? No comment. Don't call me again. She hung up, hands shaking. Victor and Marcus weren't just hiring investigators. They were going to the media, trying to create public pressure, trying to force her to reveal what she'd found or look guilty by staying silent. Chun called 5 minutes later. I just got off the phone with that reporter. Victor is definitely behind this. He's trying to build a narrative that your grandmother was mentally incompetent and that you somehow manipulated her into changing her will. If he can get the media interested, it puts pressure on us to reveal the treasure's existence, to prove the fort has legitimate value. What do I do? Nothing. Say nothing. The reporter is fishing. He has no evidence of anything except family drama, which happens in every estate distribution. As long as you stay quiet, there's no story. The moment you defend yourself or try to prove the fort's worth, you give him what he's looking for. This is going to get worse, isn't it? Much worse, I'm afraid. But Isabella, we knew this was coming. Your grandmother prepared for exactly this situation. Trust the process. The next week was a nightmare of maintained normalcy. Isabella went to work at the marina, scrubbing boats and avoiding personal questions. She smiled at Sofia's school events, packed lunches, helped with homework. She paid bills on time and bought groceries without stress. To anyone watching, she was just a struggling single mother getting by on multiple jobs. But underneath, the pressure built. Victor called twice, leaving voicemails that started cordial and became threatening. Marcus showed up at the marina one afternoon, watching her work with that calculating expression. The reporter called 3 more times, each message more insistent. And everywhere, always, was the secret, $591 million sitting in a vault beneath the water, changing nothing, yet changing everything. Dr. Simmons sent the preliminary authentication report on Tuesday. 47 pages of technical analysis, historical documentation, and professional assessment. The conclusion was unambiguous. The collection was genuine, historically significant, and conservatively valued at $520 million based on current market conditions. With proper marketing and provenance documentation, that figure could easily exceed $600 million. Chun began the process of establishing legal ownership, filing documents with the county, registering the collection with various historical preservation societies, creating a paper trail that would make Isabella's claim unassailable. But each filing created opportunities for discovery, for Victor's investigators to find threads that led back to the treasure. On Friday, 2 weeks after the authentication visit, everything came to a head. Isabella was at the diner, pulling a morning shift, when Marcus walked in with two men in suits. He sat at the counter with exaggerated casualness, ordering coffee while his companions took a nearby booth. "Isabella, how nice to see you working so hard." His voice carried to the other customers. "Tell me, how does it feel knowing you manipulated a senile old woman into giving you property while cutting out her actual family?" Isabella's hand froze on the coffee pot. "I didn't manipulate anyone. Abuela made her own choices." "Did she?" "Because our lawyers have been looking into those choices, and they've found some interesting things. Like the fact that she spent 15 years obsessed with that worthless fort, going out there constantly, hiring lawyers to help her with historical research." "What was she researching, Isabella? What was so valuable about a pile of rocks that she'd pay thousands in legal fees?" The diner went quiet. Everyone was listening now. Linda shot Isabella a look that said this better not become a problem. "I don't know what she was doing out there. She never told me." "Really?" "Because we have witnesses who say you've been visiting the fort, renting boats, spending hours out there. What are you looking for? Or maybe you already found it." Marcus leaned forward. "Here's what I think. I think Abuela found something. Maybe treasure, maybe historical artifacts, something valuable. I think she hid it and told you about it, and now you're trying to keep it all for yourself." "That's ridiculous." "Is it? Then prove me wrong. Let's visit the fort. Let's see what's there. If it's really just worthless ruins like everyone says, you've got nothing to hide." Isabella felt the trap closing. If she refused, it looked like she was hiding something. If she agreed, they might find evidence of the vault, might piece together what was really there. Either way, she lost. "The fort is dangerous," she said carefully. "Stones falling constantly, structure unstable. I'm not letting anyone go there until I can get it properly surveyed and reinforced." "How convenient." Marcus stood, dropping a 20 on the counter. "Enjoy your coffee and pancakes while you can, cousin. Our lawyers are filing an injunction next week to prevent you from accessing the fort until the estate dispute is resolved. If there's something valuable there, it'll be frozen as part of the contested estate. You won't be able to touch it, move it, or profit from it until the courts decide who it really belongs to." He left with his suited companions, leaving Isabella standing behind the counter with every eye in the diner on her. Linda approached slowly. "Isabella, what was that about?" "Family drama. My grandmother's will. It's nothing." It didn't sound like nothing. It sounded like there's treasure or something at that fort he mentioned. "There's no treasure. Just a family fight over property nobody actually wants." But the damage was done. By lunch, the other waitresses were whispering. By dinner, customers were asking questions. By the time Isabella's shift ended, the story had taken on a life of its own. The poor waitress who inherited a pirate fort that might contain hidden treasure, family fighting over it, lawyers getting involved. Chen called as she was driving home. "We have a problem. Victor filed for an emergency injunction to prevent you from accessing the fort. The hearing is Monday. If the judge grants it, we'll be locked out until the estate dispute is resolved, which could take years." "Can they do that?" "They could try. The argument is that the fort is part of the estate and its contents need to be preserved until ownership is determined. It's a weak argument. The will clearly gave you the fort, but weak arguments can still succeed if the judge is cautious." "What happens to the treasure if we get locked out?" "It stays where it is, inaccessible, which is actually not the worst outcome. At least it's hidden and protected. But it means we lose control of the timeline, lose the ability to properly document and secure the collection before going public." Isabella pulled over, suddenly unable to drive. "This is falling apart. Everything Abuela planned, everything she prepared for, it's falling apart." "It's not falling apart. It's just getting harder." "But Isabella, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Are you prepared to fight? Really fight with everything you have? Because this battle is going to get ugly. They're going to attack your character, your relationship with your grandmother, your fitness as a parent. They're going to drag your name through the mud and make you look like a manipulative opportunist. Can you handle that?" Isabella thought about Sofia, about the life she wanted to give her daughter, about not having to worry if the car would start, if the rent was paid, if there was food in the refrigerator, about choices, opportunities, the kind of security that money couldn't buy, but treasure could provide. Yes, I can handle it. Good, because we're about to go to war. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Chen's office became command central. Papers spread across every surface. Legal precedents were searched and analyzed. Dr. Simmons flew in from Boston to provide expert testimony, if needed. Chen's paralegal, a sharp woman named Jennifer, compiled evidence of Esperanza's mental competence. Medical records, testimony from neighbors, documentation of her methodical approach to the fort purchase and preservation. Sunday evening, Chen laid out the strategy. Tomorrow's hearing is about preventing you from accessing the fort. Victor will argue that you're trying to remove or destroy valuable estate property before it can be properly inventoried. We'll counter that the fort was specifically left to you in a valid will, that you have every right to access your own property, and that their real goal is harassment and delay. What if we lose? If we lose, we shift strategies. We wait out the estate litigation, which I'm confident we'll win eventually. It's slower, more expensive, and gives Victor time to investigate, but the treasure isn't going anywhere. The vault has protected it for 300 years. It could protect it a while longer. Isabella barely slept that night. She lay awake thinking about Abuela, about 15 years of secret planning, about the weight of inheritance that came with conditions attached. The treasure wasn't just money. It was trust, responsibility, the burden of protecting what had been given. Monday morning, Isabella dressed in her best outfit. The Goodwill dress, ironed carefully, with shoes Maria had lent her that almost fit. Chen had emphasized the importance of appearance, of looking like someone who deserved sympathy rather than suspicion. The courthouse was in Key Largo, a small building with ceiling fans and American flags. Victor was already there with his legal team, 3 lawyers in expensive suits who looked like they charged by the minute. Marcus sat beside him, confident and smug. The hearing lasted 90 minutes. Victor's lead attorney, a slick man named Davidson, painted Isabella as a manipulative opportunist who had exploited her grandmother's mental decline. He produced character witnesses, Esperanza's neighbors, local shopkeepers, who testified that the old woman had become obsessed with the fort in her final years, acting strangely, talking about pirates and treasure like they were real. This is not the behavior of a sound mind, Davidson argued. This is the behavior of someone suffering from dementia or delusion. And Miss Rodriguez took advantage of that vulnerable state to position herself as the primary beneficiary, cutting out Mrs. Santos' legitimate children and grandchildren who had cared for her for years. Chen's response was surgical. He produced medical records from 3 separate neurologists, all evaluating Esperanza within 6 months of her death, all certifying her complete mental competence. He showed the court detailed documentation of Esperanza's fort research, permits filed correctly, historical surveys conducted professionally, evidence of methodical planning rather than delusional obsession. Mrs. Santos wasn't suffering from dementia, Chen said. She was conducting legitimate historical research, as was her right. She purchased the fort legally, maintained it responsibly, and chose to leave it to her granddaughter in a properly executed will. The fact that her son and grandson don't like that choice doesn't make it invalid. The judge, a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Rodriguez, no relation, listened carefully and asked pointed questions. When Davidson tried to argue that the fort might contain valuable historical artifacts that needed protection, she interrupted. Do you have any evidence that there are valuable artifacts at the fort? Any documentation, any expert testimony, any proof whatsoever beyond speculation? Davidson hesitated. Not direct evidence, Your Honor, but the defendant's behavior suggests. Suggesting isn't evidence, Mr. Davidson. If there were artifacts of significant historical or monetary value, wouldn't Mrs. Santos have documented them during her 15 years of research? Wouldn't she have contacted museums or historical societies? Wouldn't there be some paper trail? Perhaps she kept it secret, Your Honor. Perhaps she and the defendant conspired to. Conspiracy theories are not evidence either. Judge Rodriguez shuffled papers. I'm not going to grant an injunction based on speculation and family drama. The will appears valid. The mental competency documentation is substantial, and Miss Rodriguez has every right to access property that was legally left to her. Motion denied. Isabella felt the tension drain from her shoulders. They'd won. The fort remained hers, at least for now. But as they filed out of the courtroom, Davidson caught up to Chun in the hallway. This isn't over. We're filing to contest the will in probate court. Full accounting of the estate, complete inventory of all properties and contents, forensic examination of Mrs. Santos' finances in her final years. If there's treasure at that fort, we will find it. And when we do, we'll prove that Miss Rodriguez manipulated her grandmother into giving her something worth millions, while the legitimate family got pennies. Prove it, Chin said coldly. Bring evidence, not accusations. Until then, Isabella keeps what's legally hers. On the courthouse steps, Marcus grabbed Isabella's arm. You think you've won? You haven't won anything. Dad's going to tie you up in litigation for years. Every dollar you try to spend, every coin you try to sell, will be there with lawyers and injunctions and freezes. You'll die of old age before you see a penny of whatever's out there. Isabella pulled her arm away. There's nothing out there, Marcus. Just ruins and memories. You're wasting your father's money fighting over worthless property because you can't stand the idea that Abuela loved me more than she loved you. His face flushed with anger. She didn't love you more. She was crazy and you manipulated her. Everyone knows it. Then prove it. Stop making threats and prove it. She walked away before he could respond, Chun beside her. They didn't speak until they reached his car, doors closed, away from prying ears. That went better than expected, Chun said. But he's right about one thing. They're going to make this as difficult as possible. Every step of the authentication process, every attempt to move or document the collection, they'll be watching for evidence to use against you. So what do? We accelerate the timeline. The coins need to come out of the fort and into secure storage before Victor can get another injunction. Once they're documented, authenticated, and in a vault, they're protected regardless of what happens with the estate litigation. Won't that look suspicious? Like I'm trying to hide evidence. Not if we do it right. We frame it as historical preservation, moving vulnerable artifacts from an unstable structure into proper museum-quality storage. Dr. Simmons has contacts at the Smithsonian who can help with that framing. Legitimate historical concern, not treasure-hunting greed. Isabella thought about the vault, about 47 chests of gold coins waiting in darkness. How long will it take? To move everything? At least a week of careful work. We need to do it quietly, preferably at night, using a crew we can absolutely trust. And we need to do it soon, before Victor can convince another judge to freeze the property. Then let's do it, before anything else goes wrong. But of course, things were already going wrong in ways Isabella couldn't see yet. That evening, as she picked up Sofia from school, a woman approached in the parking lot. Professional clothes, friendly smile, recorder in hand. Miss Rodriguez? I'm Sarah Chun with Channel 7 News. I'm doing a story on unusual inheritance disputes in Florida. Would you be willing to comment on your grandmother's estate and the fort she left you? No comment. Isabella tried to move past, but the reporter blocked her path gently. I understand your uncle is claiming the fort might contain valuable historical artifacts. Our research shows that Santiago the pirate was a real person, that legends about his treasure have persisted for centuries. Is it possible your grandmother found something? I don't know what my grandmother found or didn't find. The fort is just old stones. That's all. Then why is your family fighting so hard for it? Why hire expensive lawyers and investigators over worthless property? Because they're vindictive and can't stand that Abuela chose me. Now please, I need to pick up my daughter. But the damage was accelerating. The story ran that night. Local woman inherits mysterious fort. Family claims treasure. The coverage was sensationalized, but not entirely inaccurate. They showed old drawings of Santiago the pirate, interviewed historians about Spanish colonial treasure, speculated wildly about what might be hidden in the ruins. By morning, Isabella's phone was flooded with messages. Reporters, treasure hunters, people offering to buy the fort, people claiming to be distant relatives with inheritance rights. The story had gone viral on social media, spawning conspiracy theories and amateur investigations. Chen called early. We need to move now, tonight, before this media attention brings more legal complications. Tonight? But we haven't. I know it's rushed, but we're out of time. I've got Dr. Simmons standing by with a conservation team. We'll work through the night if we have to. Get the collection into secure storage while we still can. Isabella looked at Sofia eating cereal, oblivious to the storm gathering around them. Okay, tonight. The next 12 hours passed in anxious preparation. Chun arranged for 3 boats, special transport containers designed for historical artifacts, and a 5-person team sworn to secrecy. Dr. Simmons flew in, with conservation specialists from Boston. Everything was coordinated to happen after dark, away from prying eyes. At 10 p.m., Isabella left Sofia with Maria, just going to handle some legal paperwork, might be late, and drove to Islamorada. The boats were waiting, engines running low. Chun, Dr. Simmons, and 3 conservation specialists dressed in dark clothing. They looked like a heist crew, which wasn't far from the truth. The crossing to Santiago Key took 30 minutes. No moon, perfect darkness, water reflecting stars. The fort rose from the shadows like something from a dream, ancient and impossible. Inside the vault, the team worked with military precision. Each chest was photographed in position, assigned an identification number, and carefully packed into transport containers. The coins inside were documented, but not removed. That would come later, in controlled laboratory conditions. For now, they just needed to move the collection to safety. 4 hours into the operation, with maybe half the chests loaded, Isabella heard engines approaching. Spotlights swept across the water, brilliant and blinding. A voice boomed through a megaphone. This is the Monroe County Sheriff's Department. You are trespassing on restricted property. Cease activities immediately and prepare to be boarded. Chun swore quietly. Victor must have called them, claimed we were looting historical artifacts. The sheriff's boat pulled alongside theirs, deputies in tactical gear boarding carefully. The lead deputy, a weathered man named Ramirez, surveyed the scene with professional skepticism. I'm going to need someone to explain what's happening here. Historical preservation, Chun said smoothly, pulling out credentials. I'm Howard Chun, attorney for Miss Rodriguez, who legally owns this property. We're relocating vulnerable artifacts from an unstable structure into proper storage facilities. At midnight, in secret, Ramirez examined one of the transport containers. What kind of artifacts are we talking about? Dr. Simmons stepped forward. Spanish colonial coins, deputy. This fort was used by pirates in the late 1700s, and we've discovered a significant cache of currency from that period. Miss Rodriguez's late grandmother spent years researching this site. We're simply continuing that work and protecting what she found. Ramirez opened one of the containers, shining his flashlight inside. His expression changed instantly. Holy shit, is that real gold? Yes, deputy. Genuine Spanish doubloons, approximately 300 years old. We're in the process of documenting and authenticating the collection. Everything is being done properly, with expert oversight and proper legal authority. How much is here? Chun and Dr. Simmons exchanged glances. The truth was about to come out, whether they were ready or not. Conservative estimate? Dr. Simmons said, $500 to $600 million. The deputy's flashlight wavered. $500 million. In a fort nobody knew about. And you were moving it in the middle of the night. To protect it, Isabella said, finding her voice. My family is contesting the will. If they find out what's really here, they'll tie it up in litigation for years while it sits exposed in a crumbling structure. We needed to secure it before that could happen. Ramirez looked at her for a long moment. I need to make some calls. Nobody moves anything until I get authorization from the county. The next hours were bureaucratic agony. Ramirez called his supervisor. The supervisor called the county attorney. The county attorney called the state's historical preservation office. Everyone had opinions about jurisdiction, proper procedure, and who had authority over what. Dawn broke while they waited, revealing the full extent of the operation. 3 boats, transport containers, a professional team, and, at the center of it all, 47 chests of Spanish gold that had just become very public knowledge. By 8 a.m., the scene had transformed into a circus. More sheriff's boats arrived, followed by Coast Guard, followed by representatives from various state agencies. News helicopters circled overhead. Reporters in private boats tried to get close enough for footage. The secret was out. After 300 years of hiding, after Abuela's 15 years of careful planning, after Isabella's weeks of careful secrecy, the treasure had been discovered by the world. And standing on the shore of Santiago Key, watching the chaos unfold, Isabella saw Marcus filming everything on his phone, that familiar smirk plastered across his face. He'd called the sheriff. He'd tipped off the media. He turned Isabella's careful rescue operation into a public spectacle. And in doing so, he'd just made everything infinitely more complicated. Chun appeared at her shoulder, expression grim. "We need to get you out of here before the reporters start asking questions. What about the treasure? The county is seizing it temporarily, pending investigation of the legal status. It'll be secured in a state facility until ownership can be determined, which means we're headed for court, and this is going to be a very public fight." Isabella watched as deputies carefully loaded the transport containers onto official vessels. Her treasure, her inheritance, her future, being taken by strangers while cameras recorded everything. "Isabella," a reporter shouted from a nearby boat, "how does it feel to discover $500 million in pirate treasure? Did your grandmother tell you about the gold?" Another yelled. "Will you share with your family?" Chin pulled her toward their boat. "Don't answer. Don't say anything. We need to get out of here now." As they pulled away from Santiago Key, Isabella looked back one last time. The fort stood unchanged, ancient stones weathered by centuries, keeping secrets even as its greatest secret had been revealed. The conference room at Chin's office had become war headquarters. Every wall covered with documents, timelines, legal precedents. Isabella sat at the center of the table, coffee going cold in her hand, watching Chun and his team prepare for the battle that was about to consume her life. "The county has secured the treasure in a state facility," Chun said, pointing to a diagram on the whiteboard, "which is actually good for us. It's protected, documented under guard. Victor can't get to it, and neither can the treasure hunters who've been calling nonstop since the story broke." "But we can't get to it either," Isabella said. "Not yet. But here's what's happening. The state attorney general is investigating the legal status of the find. They're looking at maritime law, treasure trove statutes, historical preservation regulations. The good news is that every legal expert we've consulted agrees the treasure belongs to you. You own the property where it was found. Your grandmother clearly intended you to have it, and there's no superior claim from Spain or any other government entity." Dr. Simmons added, "The preliminary authentication report has been filed with the court. 47 chests containing approximately 53,000 coins. Total estimated value, $587 million. Your grandmother's estimate was remarkably accurate. $587 million. The number still didn't feel real. Isabella thought about the eviction notice that had started all of this, about counting coins in a laundromat, about Sofia's worn-out shoes. The distance between that life and this number was so vast it felt like different universes. "Victor has filed an emergency motion," Chun continued. "He's claiming the treasure was part of Esperanza's estate and should have been disclosed during probate. He's also arguing that Esperanza wasn't mentally competent when she made her will, that she was suffering from delusions about pirates and treasure." "But the treasure is real," Isabella said. "How can finding something real be evidence of delusions?" "That's exactly what we'll argue. But we need to be prepared for how ugly this is going to get. Victor's lawyers are already talking to the media, painting you as a gold digger who manipulated her grandmother. The public narrative matters almost as much as the legal facts." Jennifer, Chin's paralegal, pulled up news coverage on her laptop. Every major outlet was running the story. Single mother discovers $600 million pirate treasure. Family fights over Spanish gold. Modern-day pirate gold sparks legal battle. Most stories were neutral, presenting facts. But some were less kind, questioning why Isabella had kept the discovery secret, why she tried to move the treasure at night, whether she was trying to steal from her own family. "We need to control the narrative," Jennifer said. "Give our side of the story before they define it for us." "No," Chen was firm. "Every word Isabella says publicly becomes evidence. Victor's lawyers will parse every syllable looking for inconsistencies, admissions, anything they can use. We stay silent. We let the facts speak, and we let Victor's desperation make him look bad." Over the next week, that strategy proved correct. Victor gave multiple interviews, his story growing more dramatic with each telling. Esperanza had been paranoid, obsessed, suffering from dementia. Isabella had poisoned her mind against her own family, isolated her, manipulated her into changing her will. The treasure should be divided equally among all heirs. It was only fair. But each interview made Victor look worse. Greedy, desperate, a wealthy man trying to steal from his own daughter's modest inheritance because he couldn't stand that his mother had chosen her over him. The turning point came on day 9. A reporter found records showing that Victor had tried to have Esperanza declared mentally incompetent 3 years earlier, seeking guardianship over her and control of her finances. The petition had been denied by a judge who found Esperanza sharp as a tack and perfectly capable of managing her own affairs. The headline wrote itself. Treasure heir tried to control mother's assets years before death. Victor's credibility collapsed overnight. His own legal filing, meant to establish Esperanza's incompetence, instead proved he'd been trying to take control of her money while she was alive. It looked like exactly what it was, a greedy son trying to override his mother's wishes. Marcus made it worse by giving an interview where he accidentally admitted he'd hired investigators to follow Isabella, had called the sheriff to disrupt the treasure recovery, had tipped off the media. She was trying to steal it in the middle of the night, he said. We had to protect the family's interests. But the public didn't see it that way. They saw a single mother who'd inherited something valuable being harassed by wealthy relatives who felt entitled to what wasn't theirs. The court hearing came 3 weeks after the treasure's discovery. The courtroom was packed. Media, treasure hunters, curious onlookers who'd been following the story. Isabella wore the same Goodwill dress, Chen beside her in his professional best. Across the aisle, Victor and Marcus sat with their legal team, confident despite the public relations disaster. Judge Sarah Martinez presided, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd spent 30 years dealing with family inheritance disputes. She'd reviewed everything: the will, the medical records, the treasure documentation, the competing legal arguments. This court has reviewed the evidence extensively, she began. The question before us is simple. Who owns the treasure discovered at Fort Santiago? Mr. Santos argues it should be part of his mother's estate, divided according to intestacy laws rather than the will. Miss Rodriguez argues it was specifically left to her as part of the fort property. Davidson, Victor's lawyer, stood to present his argument. Your Honor, the treasure represents a substantial asset that Mrs. Santos failed to disclose during estate planning. Had the family known about these coins, the estate distribution would have been dramatically different. My client believes his mother was suffering from cognitive decline that prevented her from making sound decisions about property distribution. Your client tried to have his mother declared incompetent 3 years before her death, Judge Martinez said dryly. A petition that was denied because she was demonstrably competent. That undermines his current claim significantly. That was a different situation, Your Honor. We were concerned about her obsession with the fort, the money she was spending on legal fees and research, the research that led to the discovery of a $600 million treasure. That obsession. The judge's skepticism was evident. Mr. Chun, your response? Chun stood, calm and prepared. Your Honor, the facts are straightforward. Mrs. Esperanza Santos purchased Fort Santiago legally in 2008. She spent 15 years conducting legitimate historical research, which she documented meticulously. She found a treasure that had been hidden for 3 centuries, and she made the deliberate choice to leave that discovery to her granddaughter. He pulled out Abuela's letter, the one Isabella had received after the will reading. This letter, written in Mrs. Santos' own hand, explicitly describes the treasure and her intention that Isabella inherited. She explains her reasoning, that Isabella had the character and judgment to handle such wealth responsibly. She also explains why she didn't tell her son or grandson, because she knew they would contest it, would try to take it, would create exactly the situation we're seeing today. Your Honor, Davidson interrupted, that letter could have been written any time, could have been forged. It's in my client's handwriting, Chun said. We have 3 handwriting experts prepared to testify to its authenticity. We also have documentation showing that Mrs. Santos worked with me for 2 years preparing for exactly this legal challenge. She anticipated every argument Mr. Santos is making now, and she structured the estate specifically to protect Isabella's inheritance. Judge Martinez reviewed the letter, her expression unreadable. The courtroom was silent, everyone waiting. Here's what I see, the judge finally said. I see an intelligent woman who made a remarkable discovery. I see her spending years carefully planning how to protect that discovery for the granddaughter she loved. I see a will that was properly executed with multiple witnesses and professional legal counsel. I see medical documentation of complete mental competence. And I see a son who's upset he didn't get what he thought he deserved. She looked directly at Victor. Mr. Santos, I understand your disappointment, but your mother had the right to leave her property to anyone she chose. The treasure was found on property she owned and specifically bequeathed to your niece. That makes it Isabella Rodriguez's property, not part of the general estate. Your Honor, Davidson tried to interrupt. I'm not finished. I'm also troubled by the evidence that you hired investigators to harass Miss Rodriguez, that you called law enforcement to disrupt a legitimate recovery operation, and that you've waged a media campaign clearly designed to pressure her into surrendering property that's legally hers. That behavior doesn't help your case. Judge Martinez closed the folder in front of her. The treasure belongs to Isabella Rodriguez. The will stands as written. The estate distribution proceeds as Mrs. Santos intended. Motion dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for their phones. Isabella felt Chin's hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring, but she couldn't move. Couldn't quite believe what had just happened. She'd won. The treasure was hers. Legally, officially, irrevocably hers. Across the aisle, Victor's face had gone white. Marcus looked stunned, like reality had just slapped him. Their expensive lawyers gathered papers with grim efficiency, already calculating their fees for the inevitable appeal. But as Isabella walked out of the courtroom, Victor grabbed her arm. His voice was low, vicious. This isn't over. We'll appeal. We'll find something. You don't deserve this, Isabella. You're nothing. You'll always be nothing. Isabella met his eyes, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel small under his judgment. I'm not nothing, Uncle Victor. I'm exactly what Abuela always said I was, strong enough to survive without money, and wise enough to use it well once I had it. That's why she chose me over you. She pulled free and walked away, Chun and Dr. Simmons flanking her. Behind her, she heard Marcus's voice. We'll see how long you keep it, cousin. We'll see. The appeals came, as promised. Victor filed every motion his lawyers could think of, challenging every aspect of the ruling. But each challenge failed. The treasure remained Isabella's, secured in the state facility, while authentication and conservation continued. The process took months. Each coin had to be cataloged, photographed, authenticated, assessed for condition and rarity. Dr. Simmons oversaw everything, bringing in specialists from around the world. The collection was even more remarkable than initial estimates suggested. Coins from 12 different Spanish mints, dates spanning nearly a century, including several extremely rare pieces that alone were worth millions. Final authentication report, 53,417 coins. Total appraised value, $591,347,000. Abuela had been off by less than 1%. During those months, Isabella's life existed in strange suspension. She still lived in her apartment, still worked at the marina, though the boats she cleaned now belonged to people who recognized her from the news. She was famous in an uncomfortable way. Strangers approached her in grocery stores, some congratulatory, others asking for money, still others angry that she'd gotten rich while others struggled. The hardest part was watching people she cared about deal with their own struggles while knowing she could help but wasn't allowed to touch the treasure yet. Maria's car broke down, and Isabella had to bite her tongue instead of buying her a new one. Sofia's school needed supplies, and Isabella wanted to donate thousands, but had to settle for a modest check that wouldn't raise questions. It's like being rich and poor at the same time, she told Chun during one of their regular meetings. I know the money is coming, but I can't access it, can't use it, can't even really believe it's mine. That will change, Chun assured her. The authentication is almost complete. Once we have the full documentation, we can begin the process of liquidating parts of the collection. Not all of it. There's too much historical value to sell everything, but enough to give you immediate liquidity while we figure out long-term management. How much is enough? How much do you need to feel secure? Isabella thought about that. About bills paid, about savings accounts, about Sofia's education funded, about never having to choose between medicine and rent again. I don't know. What's reasonable? Chun smiled. Isabella, you're about to have $591 million. Reasonable is whatever you want it to be. The liquidation strategy was careful and methodical. Some coins would go to museums, donated for tax benefits and historical preservation. Some would be sold at auction, carefully marketed to maximize value. Some would be kept as a personal collection, both for their historical significance and as insurance against future financial uncertainty. The first auction was scheduled for 8 months after the court ruling. Sotheby's, New York, a carefully curated selection of 200 exceptional pieces. The preview drew collectors from around the world, each coin displayed like the artwork it essentially was. Isabella attended with Sofia, both of them dressed in clothes that actually fit and hadn't come from thrift stores. Sofia had been confused by the sudden changes. Why they could afford things now, why Mama didn't have to work so many jobs, but she'd adapted with the resilience of children. These are Abuela's coins, Sofia whispered, staring at the display cases. They are, and now they're ours. She wanted us to have them, wanted us to understand what they represent. What do they represent? History, hard work, patience, and the belief that we're strong enough to handle what she gave us. The auction raised $47 million. 200 coins from a collection of 53,000. Isabella watched the numbers climb on the display board and felt tears she couldn't quite explain. Relief, certainly. Gratitude. But also grief for Abuela, who had found this treasure and lived modestly for 15 years, waiting for the right moment to pass it on. After the auction, Chun transferred $10 million into an account in Isabella's name. For immediate needs, he said, while we set up the trust fund, the investment strategy, the long-term management structure. Isabella stared at the bank statement showing $10 million. Money that was actually accessible, actually hers. She could pay any bill, buy any house, help anyone who needed it. The freedom was overwhelming. The first thing she did was call Maria. I'm buying you a car, Isabella said. A good one, reliable, safe. Don't argue with me. Isabella, you don't have to. You watched Sofia for me 100 times. You lent me money when I had nothing. You were kind when you didn't have to be. Now I can be kind back. Please let me. The second thing was setting up a foundation. Not for herself, but for others like her, single mothers, people struggling, families one crisis away from disaster. The Isabella Santos Foundation, named for both her and Abuela, funded childcare assistance, emergency grants, job training. The kind of help that didn't make headlines, but changed lives. Victor and Marcus eventually stopped fighting. The appeals were exhausting their resources, and public opinion had turned completely against them. They settled into bitter silence, refusing to acknowledge Isabella at family functions they sometimes couldn't avoid. But others reached out. Distant cousins, family friends, people who remembered Esperanza fondly and wanted to share stories about her. Isabella learned things she'd never known. How Abuela had helped neighbors quietly during hard times, how she'd funded scholarships for local students, how she'd been planning this inheritance for longer than anyone had realized. She talked about you constantly, one neighbor told Isabella. Said you had her stubbornness, her resourcefulness. Said you're the only one in the family who understood that struggle builds character. She was so proud of you, even when things were hard. 2 years after discovering the treasure, Isabella stood on the beach near Fort Santiago. The structure had been stabilized, reinforced, turned into a proper historical site. The dungeon vault was sealed, protected, marked with a plaque that told Santiago's story and Esperanza's discovery. Sofia ran along the waterline, chasing waves, her laughter carrying on the wind. She was 9 now, thriving in a good school, already showing signs of Abuela's sharp intelligence and Isabella's determination. "Mama, can we go inside the fort?" Sofia called. "Not today, baby. Today we're just visiting." But Isabella walked closer to the structure, running her hand along the weathered stones. Somewhere beneath these walls, in a sealed chamber that would never be opened again, was the place where everything had changed, where 300 years of hiding had ended, where Abuela's plan had come to fruition, where Isabella had discovered she was stronger than she'd believed possible. Her phone buzzed. Chun, with news about another museum acquisition, another auction result, another detail in the endless process of managing wealth. She'd answer it later. Right now, she just wanted to stand here with her daughter and feel the weight of what they'd inherited. Not money, though there was certainly that. Not treasure, though they had plenty. But something deeper. The knowledge that Abuela had believed in her, had trusted her, had known that Isabella would fight for what was right and win. "Thank you," Isabella whispered to the stones, to the sea, to the memory of the woman who had changed everything. "Thank you for believing I was strong enough." The waves crashed against the rocks, the eternal rhythm that had witnessed Santiago hiding his treasure, Esperanza finding it, and Isabella claiming it. Some things changed, some things endured, and somewhere in between was the truth that Abuela had understood. Real wealth wasn't what you had, but what you did with what you'd been given. Isabella called Sofia back, took her daughter's hand, and walked toward their car. Behind them, Fort Santiago stood sentinel, keeping its remaining secrets, bearing witness to the story that had unfolded within its walls. The fort that had looked like nothing had become everything. The grandmother who'd seemed eccentric had been brilliant. The granddaughter who'd felt worthless had been exactly worthy enough. And the treasure that had waited 300 years had finally found someone who understood its true value. Not in the gold itself, but in the freedom it provided to build something meaningful, help others who struggled, and prove that character mattered more than circumstances. Isabella Rodriguez, who had once counted coins in a laundromat with $23.47 to her name, now managed a fortune worth over $500 million. But more importantly, she was showing Sofia what Abuela had shown her, that strength came from struggle, that wisdom came from hardship, and that the greatest treasures weren't found in vaults beneath the water, but in the courage to keep fighting when everything seemed impossible. The sun set over Santiago Key, painting the water gold. And in that golden light, Isabella could almost see Abuela smiling, satisfied that her plan had worked, that her faith had been justified, that her treasure had found its rightful home. Not in a vault or a museum or a collector's display case, but in the hands of someone who would use it to build something beautiful. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.